So soldering XLR plugs is and XLR connectors is much easier if you start with a virgin unused connector. But a lot of time here at NESCOM, we're going to reuse some connectors because we have a whole bunch left over from old projects. And it makes it harder for you. You're going to have to desolder before you ever solder. And since desoldering is actually harder than soldering, I think it's a good skill to learn. So here's a connector that was cut off of something else. Somebody, I don't know if you can see it, but somebody's put rubber shrink around the ends. If the wires are attached, I have to desolder and disconnect it. That's the right word, disconnect. So I could probably do this without putting it in the vise, but I'm going to start by chopping off all the leads that are there. And I'm going to leave a little tiny bit on the end there. It'll be easier to pull off with the pliers. And so I cut it off so I can throw this away. Next thing is I want to try to get, if you run across one that has a shrink tubing on it, you want to try to pull the shrink tubing off. You don't ever want to try to melt shrink tubing with a soldering iron. It makes a big gooey mess that could potentially pretty much destroy the tip on your iron. So you don't want to melt anything other than solder with your iron. I'm having pretty good success here getting the rubber off of the shrink. Obviously, it takes a moment. Sometimes it won't come off, so that's when the little cutters come in and kind of rip apart the shrink tubing with the cutters. I don't know how you doing on the camera work. Is
good.
Good enough? Good. And we're gonna clean. I'm almost there. Sorry, folks. There we go. I got it off. So all the rubber's missing. The next thing is, I'll show you real close. You can see there's remnant of wire. You can see the copper wire, and you can see the solder in the little cups of the XLR. This, of course, is a male XLR plug. I'll just take a moment before, in case I forget later in the video. This is a male one. It has pins as opposed to receptacles. That's the female XLR. And it's pretty simple. This is a Neutrik, which is kind of industry standard at this point. It has a little tiny tab right there on the top that allows it to go into the, I don't know what we call this, a case? Chassis? Chassis. And it allows it to not spin. And then there's two other pieces. There's a little clutch or clamp or what's the word? I'm blanking.
Strain relief?
Strain. This is the strain relief. I'm blanking. I said it in the previous video on this, but anyway, it clamps down. The strain relief, which is on the wire, comes in and tightens down and tightens this down so that when you pull the wire, you're not actually pulling on the solder. So these are all the parts. And this is a male plug. The female plug is very similar. It has the same parts. It just has receptacles, not pins. Cool. Done that. Said what I need to say there. I'm going to try to desolder. Hopefully I can get this all done in one video. The desoldering can take a moment. I'm going to straighten the copper remnants here. I'm going to put it in the pan of ice, and this is super important. Don't clamp down on the pins like this because the plug's going to get hot and the pins will start getting compressed inward. So you definitely want to connect, you want to do it, you want to hold the plug on its kind of big hard plastic. Another thing that students do incorrectly is they will mount it like this downward. And the problem with this is you have to stand above it to see it, so the smoke goes right up your nose. You don't want that. The other thing is the solder you're trying to desolder, you're trying to get rid of solder, the solder actually rolls with gravity downward. So that's no good. You want to have it this way, and you'll learn the cups are kind of, what's that, a half circle, half moon shaped. So you don't want to have it upside down, so you can't get under. You want that half moon facing upwards. And okay, so I got it all kind of ready here. I have to remember to make it visible for the camera. And okay, step number 1 to soldering. Clean your tip every single time you grab the iron. You want to clean your tip. You want your tip to be shiny. You want your tip to not have chunks on it. You want it to be, the cleaner it is, the hotter the temperature it can get. Next thing, every single time you solder, you need to put solder on your tip. It's called tinning your tip. It will make smoke. What's the smoke? Well, the smoke is, this is what we call rosin core solder. Inside there's something called rosin in it, or also known as flux. And it's a chemical or a set of chemicals, or I don't know what it is, a compound that does a couple fancy things. Look it up on Wikipedia if you want to read exactly what it does. But it burns off any junk that's on the metal. and cleans the metal so the solder can adhere snugly to it. So the solder doesn't roll off and bead up, and it makes for a nice, good connection. And when you first tin the iron and it's smoking, there is rosin there. But when the smoke stops, the rosin's all gone. And so if you just let it chill out for a while, all the rosin burns off and you're not going to get any of those awesome properties of cleaning up the metal. And another great thing about the rosin is I don't know if it actually makes the tip hotter or if it just helps solder flow to other spots. When you add solder, the tip is ready to melt other things around it. If you don't add solder and you don't have that fresh flux, it's much harder for me to melt the stuff in that tip than it is if I add solder and at the same time and get everything up to temperature together, the whole thing just melted instantaneously. Whereas if I don't have fresh solder, it will take a moment. It takes a long time to get up to temperature. And during that whole long time, the rest of the plug is heating up and falling apart. So it's all about cleaning and adding fresh solder at the moment and at the joint when you want it. So even when you desolder and you're trying to get rid of solder, you add solder because you want to have that fresh flux and fresh heat. Okay, I think that's the end of a good video. We can actually do the tearing apart in another video, but I just really want to emphasize cleaning fresh solder while it's smoking. Cool? Excellent.